Welcome back. Day 30 of Hammerween, our penultimate day in our look at the Hammer films, sees us looking at 1976's To the Devil, a Daughter, which was the final film in the original filmography, if you will, of Hammer, with the false dawns of the 1980s and the 2000s, 1980s for TV, 2000s for the revived era. Not quite matching the output we've had in the original run, has it? But hey, we can but hope that in the future, Mr. Gore, who now owns it, will do something. So, synopsis and review as always. Father Michael Rayner, played by that there Christopher Lee, is a Catholic priest who is excommunicated for heresy. Although, as he tells us up top, it is not heresy. I will not recant, in rather iconic lines. 20 years later, he's running the cult, the Children of the Lord. Catherine Beddoes, a girl coming up for her 18th birthday, has been raised in the order at the urging of her mother, who was a true believer in the cause. So Catherine, dressed as a nun, been raised in the kind of shrouds of Catholicism, but with a rather different belief system, is sent to England to return to her father, played by Denham Elliott. Meanwhile, John Verney is a famous American writer, occultist, occult novelist, and he's living in London and he's approached a book launch of his by Denham Elliott himself, playing Henry, who is Catherine's father. Catherine is played by Natasha Kinski. And Henry asks John Verney, who's played by Richard Widmark, if he wouldn't mind picking up Catherine from Heathrow Airport and looking after her for a few days because she's in danger from a satanic cult called the Children of the Lord, and only you, with your expertise in the matters of the cult, can perhaps help her and whatnot. He takes up the case, old Richard Widmark, Verney, and he finds Catherine in her habit and intercepts her from a member of the gang who are representing the children of the Lord and trying to grab her. Verney takes her back to his home, and picks up information about the cult from her. He's visited by his friends, his editor Anna, and her husband David, and informs them that he thinks the cult were going to use Catherine in a ritualistic fashion on her 18th birthday, which just so happens to be on All Hallows Eve, Halloween, Samhain. Um, Verney leaves, Richard Widmark leaves Catherine with Anna and David while he goes to kind of investigate the London headquarters of the Children of the Lord. We cut to a private residence somewhere on the continent, and Christopher Lee, Father Rayner, along with a nurse, oversees Margaret, a member of the cult, going into labor. After she gives birth, he has her killed. Christopher Lee's priest has her killed with an overdose of morphine, and says, "You will die now, Margaret," but in a very serene fashion. So this is clearly the plan. She's party to it. While this is happening, she's having convulsions during the pregnancy, and Catherine, all the way over in London, is having the exact same convulsions in her sleep. So there seems to be some kind of psychic connection. The cult, the Children of the Lord, use black magic to draw Catherine out. She visits the docks, where, still out looking for the cult, Verney just happens to stumble across her in a rather pat bit of writing, and he rips off the pendant from her chest, which is not a crucifix, but rather a symbol of Astaroth, a sacrilegious deity. He attempts to convince Catherine that Astaroth's evil, but she's so indoctrinated that she kind of struggles to accept that. But she does start to have flashbacks of an act of an orgy, basically, where she is in the body of Margaret, the woman who gave birth a few scenes earlier. And she remembers that Margaret was penetrated and inseminated by Christopher Lee's priest, Father Rayner. So she's living in someone else's memories essentially, and she sees the child, if you like, that comes of that relationship, but it's a horrible little demon-like creature that comes out, which is rather disturbing. Verney looks into it, Richard Widmark looks into it further with the bishop, the one who did excommunicate Father Rayner, and they kind of deduce that the cult are looking to essentially install the reign of this deity Astaroth, to usurp the goodness of God. Under the influence again of Christopher Lee's Rayner, Catherine murders Anna, who's looking after her, before wandering around the streets of London, where she is intercepted by the cult. So twice, the cult just ask her to go wandering out and about to fill the runtime a little bit. Unfortunately, I think the reason for having it done twice, but hey. And we cut to Verney and Anna's husband uncovering the scene of poor Anna's death. And they visit a very dishevelled Denham Elliott who's been out the film for the longest time. He is in the middle of a pentagram that he's drawn in chalk, and seems to be suffering some kind of withdrawals almost. It's a rather interesting choice. But he says he'll only help them find out where the priest has taken the young girl, you know, if if they help him break his pact. And we get a flashback scene in which we learn the involvement and how the mother of Catherine, how Natasha Kinski's mother was party to it all. We see her ghost literally it appears before our main character, so it's not just something in the imagination and whatnot. So Denham Elliott does reveal the location of where Christopher Lee and Natasha Kinski are as the priest and the child. But unfortunately, at the cost of David's life, David is burnt to cinders by touching this kind of amulet thing, which is called the Pact. It's a metal object with kind of runes and symbols of Astaroth on it. And by touching it, David dies, leaving only Richard Widmark to go investigate finally and hopefully save Catherine from Rayner, from the priest. Verney tracks Rayner down to a kind of monastery, a kind of rundown place where Catherine is laid out in an altar. The place is surrounded by human blood from another cult member who sacrificed herself for the cause. Verney watches as Christopher Lee sacrifices that monster that was birthed by Margaret earlier on in the film. And we learn that essentially, and I'm going to go into spoilers for this one because we have to talk about the ending to really be able to talk about much. We established that she's going to have a new birth, a new baptism. She was baptized in her mother's blood as a babe. Now she's going to be baptized in this demon seed, and she will become Astaroth incarnate. She'll become an avatar of Astaroth, essentially. Um, it all goes a bit crazy in the visual department for a few moments from there. But Richard Widmark has picked up a stone and whelped one of the security guards who are kind of guarding the convent at that point, guarding the monastery. And because it's covered in the blood of a believer, he can enter the blood circle. At which point he can then throw it, hit Christopher Lee in the head, killing him, and rescue young Catherine, rescue Natasha Kinski. But she does have a few droplets of blood in her head, so has she really been saved? Who knows? End credits. That's a very messy, scuzzy synopsis for this film, and there's very good reason for that. And we'll go into it now with the review. It's a very messy, scuzzy film. This is one of those films that had 4 or 5 writers, and they were still rating on the set. And believe me, it shows. There are stories that literally the actors would say, "But wait a minute, my character doesn't know this person. How are we going to? How does this happen?" So rewriting on the set to cover the tracks and the missing parts means that there are phone calls galore. Okay, so we'll just have Christopher Lee pick up the phone and call Denham Elliott, and that will help with that. Oh, wait, we haven't had the relationship established between Richard Widmark and Christopher Lee. How's he even going to recognize him? Oh, we'll have Christopher Lee's apparition appear in the church when they look for the pact. That'll do it. So there's a real feeling that this is being cobbled together and completely rushed. At the ending, a few things to talk about with the ending. One, Natasha Kinski has a full frontal nudity scene in it. She was 14 years old. No excuses. None whatsoever. Deplorable. Two, though. Two. It's a small rock. I mentioned that Richard Widmark picks up a rock and throws it at Christopher Lee. It's a small rock. It's tiny. It's a little stone. It's barely a pebble. That's the resolution. That's how he kills this agent of Astaroth who's going to bring around hell on earth. Bungs a rock at him and kills him. It's pathetic. Um, Michael Creedus, the head honcho of Hammer at the time, was away in America when this was being produced. When he saw the finished product, he begged the investors at EMI to give him some more money so that they could shoot a better ending. He was rebuffed and they had to go with the ending that unfortunately we're left with. Bit of poetic justice, though, if you've followed this series, you'll remember a couple of films that have been shut down mid-production because they've gone on for over budget or they've gone on a couple of days too long, and Michael Correa shut them down. So now he's being shut down towards the very end of Hammer being shut down. So there's a bit of poetry coming into affairs, really. In terms of the tone and whatnot, this film is bizarrely often called a rip-off of The Omen. There's very good reason why it can't be. It came out first. It's got a similar tone, a similar feel, a similar plot, but it's nothing that rips off The Omen. It's very much dealing with themes that the films of the 1970s after The Exorcist were exploring, um, devil children with a more socio-realistic portrayal. So we're not doing gothic versions. We're doing a much bleaker, a much more documentary-like approach to it, following on from William Friedkin. Even like that John Collins movie, the uh, I Wish I Was Never Born or whatever it was called, that one with the monster child, which I guess could all be said to follow in the footsteps of Rosemary's Baby in a way. But this is not in the league of The Omen, certainly not in the league of The Exorcist, and not in the league of Rosemary's Baby. It's too disjointed and it's too all over the place. And it's sad because Christopher Lee brings a wonderful performance to this film. He's clearly enjoying getting to be in a Dennis Wheatley adaptation. He was friends with Wheatley. He's clearly enjoying getting to do that. Nearly 10 years since the last one, which we might be covering tomorrow, my favorite Hammer film. And he's playing it wonderfully. He plays it exactly the way it should be played. He's a kind, decent priest with a good heart. He just so happens to have a kind, decent sensibility and a good heart towards Satan rather than God. So he doesn't twirl a mustache. He doesn't act evil. He acts good because he's the hero of his own story. So why wouldn't he? It makes perfect sense. It's a brilliant acting decision from Christopher Lee, who could be more stentorian in his performance, could be very aggressive, perhaps, very strict, let you know that he's the villain. But no, when the demon child is born, he reacts as if it's the most beautiful baby he's ever seen in his life. When he's ordering the murder of Margaret, the true believer who sacrificed her body for the cause with the morphine and says, "You have to die now, Margaret." He's doing it in the most loving way possible, very tender. It's time, Margaret, it's time for you to go. She's only about 38, it's ridiculous. But he's the hero of his own story, so it makes perfect sense. A wonderful, wonderful performance from Christopher Lee. Richard Widmark, though, as John Verney, is completely miscast. He has to convince you of two things in this film. One, he's an occult writer. He does not convince me of that in the slightest. He doesn't get across the dialogue, the cadence, the threat. Never. And he also fails in the other part, which is the more sleuth role, the private detective role. I mean, he is a writer, not a PI, but essentially he has to act like one, look after my daughter, and then investigate this cult. It doesn't do it with any sense of authority or interest whatsoever. It's a very phoned in performance from Richard Widmark. He plays it very flat, one note. And that's a great shame because I'm a big fan of his work in the 40s through the 60s. Love him in some films. Two Road Together, some of his early noir films, Judgment in Nuremberg. But here he's just miscast. It's another instance of Hammer thinking, hey, he's an American star, he'll do. When no, he's not the right guy for this part at all, unfortunately. Natasha Kinski brings a very dreamlike quality to her performance as Catherine. It's something that she becomes synonymous with, especially with Cat People in about 5 years after this, or Tess. But here, it's just so impossible to overlook the fact that she was underage and doing nudity. Ugh, yeah, horrible. There's some wonderful side characters here. Anna, the woman who's murdered whilst kind of babysitting Catherine, if you like, is played by Honor Blackman. Puts the glow on herself, Kathy Gale from the Avengers. She's great. She really feels like she is an editor for some famous occult writer. She is that kind of London showbiz chic. She sells it brilliantly. She sells on the never mind. She sells it brilliantly. As does Anthony Valentine playing David, her husband, the one who then has to go up and smoke at the church. He's terrific, wonderful character actor from Callan and from Colditz and from a lot more. Francis de la Tour pops up in here in a one lovely little scene in the Salvation Army. Derek Francis, a favourite, has been in about 10 of these films that we've talked about this month as the Bishop. For me, maybe the best role in it is Denham Elliott as the father. He plays it again as though he's having a drug addiction with religion, and he wants to be a good man or a better man, but he's in thrall to the Satanists, to the servants of Astaroth, because of what happens, which we see later in a flashback in the film, when his daughter was born. It's a stunning performance from a wonderfully underrated actor, I think, Denham Elliott, who communicates so much with his eyes and just his facial expressions and just little ticks and the way he kind of touches his face to let you know he's worried about something. Great performance, sells completely the menace of these people. And I almost wish, in fact, no, I do wish he'd played, even though I mean I wouldn't get him in this role, I wish he'd played John Verney. I think he would have been a much better choice as the lead. Yeah, he's not an American star, so we might not have got investment from EMI, but he'd have been a much better performer for the occult writer and the hero of the film. The film in general, though, as I say, it's just so all over the place, so sloppy, so put together that it just falls to bits. And no film could sustain that ending, unfortunately, and get away unscathed. It's just so bad and happens so quickly. It looks like a student film that's just been thrown together, assembled at the very end. So even if you happen to really like the build up, the ending just completely shits the bed. And it's a real shame because there is some really interesting stuff in the build up with wonderful performances, but it's all in the service of an atrocious ending, which really doesn't get across the evil of this cult at all, and it certainly doesn't get across too much about, the slightly oblique ending, which literal ending where she has the two drops of blood on her. They could do much more with that too. They could do more to think of how the Omen did that shot of Damien at the end where he turns and looks straight down the camera, smashing the fourth wall. If only we had something a bit more daring like that there here, but we don't. And again, the film has three credited writers, but I know there was definitely four at least. It just feels that way. It feels as if it's being pulled in different directions, and it's Rutger Hauer and the Hitcher, which um, doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it's annoying because the constituent parts are there. Peter Sykes directs it very unremarkably. It's shot by David Watkin very unremarkably. They're going for that mid-70s documentary-like approach to horror, ditching the more fantastical gothics of Hammer, but they don't have anything to stand in for their studio style, the house style of Hammer. They don't have anything going for them. There's a good score from Paul Glass, a really solid score, which does set up a lot of tension. But again, this whole film is in service to very little towards the end. And it's a sad way for Hammer Horror to go out. Hammer themselves would continue for another few years. They would still have, The Lady Vanishes in '79 would be the last theatrical Hammer, and well, until the revival, and then retreat to television in the 1980s. But oh, it's such a compromised way to go out this film. It really, really annoys me that it had to be that way because this film, it's all there. And it's annoying to me because one good writer could absolutely smash this. One good director could nail that ending, and just a if they didn't have to have Richard Widmark as an American star shoehorned into the lead that he's not appropriate for, and could have had a Denham Elliott type in that lead, it would work 100 times better. And then there's of course that underage girl being full frontal nude, which just horrible, absolute horrible. So just the whole thing leaves a bad taste in the mouth, unfortunately. But the good news is that we're talking about a pretty failed Dennis Wheatley adaptation today, with Christopher Lee starring in it. Well, tomorrow we're going to be talking about a wonderful Dennis Wheatley adaptation with Christopher Lee starring in it. My favorite Hammer film. Tomorrow we're talking about The Devil Rides Out. So, until then, don't have nightmares. I'll see you tomorrow.